Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the main event.
Let's go.
Round one, fight.
Thank you for tuning in to the Crypto Street Podcast. Here are your hosts, Killer Whale, Prince, and Crypto Dale.
And remember to tip your waitress.
Good afternoon, good morning, whenever you are listening to this Crypto Street audience. It's good to be here. Just me, Killer, for today. So Dale and Prince are out doing some stuff, busy, having fun, enjoying life, whatever they're up to. So it'll just be me today. But I have with me a guest that's very special and important, the CEO of Bloxroute, Uri Klarman. Uri, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Of course. I was reading the white paper of this project earlier today. And there were a lot of fascinating things about it. So we'll get to the project a little bit later. But the way we like to start everything is just give the audience a feel for the journey that has led you here. Talk about your background and all the work that you've put into this project that has led you to today.
Perfect. So I'm actually, before being a crypto guy, I'm really a networking guy, computer network. So I'm finishing up my PhD at Northwestern University. And my expertise is computer networks as a starting point. But I kind of stumbled my way into crypto by doing a networking project that I then kind of like pivoted to a different thing. And eventually we actually created something which has nothing to do with Bloxroute, but we created a crypto which has a networking proof of work, but then rather using computational resources, it uses networking resources. And it's interesting. It's not something that we should actually be used, or it's interesting from academic perspective. But we were lucky enough to find ourselves in this crypto space, and we were really excited. I feel lucky that it happened to me because there are very few networking people in this space. It's kind of like if you're from the academia like me, then if you write a bad paper, then you get bad reviews and you get rejected. But in crypto, if you write something, whatever that is, people will trash you on Reddit and then go on Twitter and say bad stuff about you. So it's really kind of scary for academia people to make the jump. So I feel very lucky that it kind of happened to me.
Awesome. So with that in mind, give the audience sort of a high-level overview of what Bloxroute is, the purpose it serves, and maybe a little bit about how it works. I'm sure we'll dive more deep into it, but give them kind of a big picture view.
Sure. So the big picture is the following. Everybody are talking about the scalability problem, but very few people are talking what causes the scalability problem. What's the bottleneck? What do we need to solve? And what we did with Bloxroute is remove that bottleneck and allow all blockchains to scale. So then Bloxroute isn't really a layer 2 solution or a layer 1 solution. It's a layer 0 solution. Okay? It's a networking infrastructure which allow all blockchains to scale. So we're not doing our own crypto. We're not doing our own blockchain. Rather, we are enablers. We take our technology, we open source it, we give it to everyone for free. And it's if you have a blockchain and you want to scale, you want to do thousands of transactions per second, we want to allow you to do that. That's what Bloxroute does. It scales other blockchains and cryptocurrency. Permissionless, blockchain, PBFT, or Hashgraph, or Harmony, you name it, whatever it is, we remove the bottleneck for you.
Okay. So I thought this was very interesting. I mean, I think scaling is maybe the biggest problem that we see among blockchains, because if you think about all the different use cases for these things, a lot of them support or require, I should say, or necessitate a lot of transactions per second. One example I remember from the white paper is if every vending machine in the US worked on the blockchain and was afforded or just executed 4 purchases per day, every vending machine, you would need somewhere around 1,000 transactions per second, I believe, just to run that. And that's a very hyper-specific thing. So how early in your experience to crypto did you realize that the scaling issue was a really big one? And what was your thought process from there?
So I think everybody knows. I also like the vending machine because it shows how the vending machine example is great, right? Because it shows you that even for the most basic stuff, you need so many transactions per second. So when people talk about credit card level, which is something like 5,000 transactions per second, all of them combined, That's nothing. We don't need crypto and blockchains to reach the credit card level. We need tens of thousands of transactions per second if we want to do microtransactions. We need hundreds of thousands of transactions per second if you want to do the really cool stuff, right? Robochains, autonomous swarm robots communicating trustlessly over the blockchain, or Twitter on a blockchain, or a Facebook on a blockchain. These stuff need 100 or 200,000 transactions per second just for that. So it's obviously not close to what we need. The credit card limit is kind of like just the first step. So I think we realize that the scalability is the thing very early on. I think last summer, we spent the summer reading white papers, a lot of white papers. And each and every one of them, not majority of them, not 99% of them, each and every one of them, it was, oh, we want to do this thing or that thing. And yeah, and by the way, if you do the math, it's like, oh, so those guys need hundreds of transactions per second. Those guys need thousands of transactions per second per application. So it was very obvious, very from the beginning, that this is what needs to be resolved. And this is where we should direct our efforts.
Mm-hmm. With that in mind, one of the more big picture ideas I was sensing from that is that it's probably not going to be enough, even if we have one blockchain that's very scalable. I think it's going to take several to accomplish all the different things that we're looking to do in the world with blockchain, And another thing I was thinking too was how, what is your opinion on how this affects blockchains that specifically sell themselves on their transaction per second ability? There are a lot of them out there. I think maybe the most popular one is probably, something perhaps like Bitcoin Cash, which is, it really focuses on bigger blocks, and explain a little bit how the bigger block thing is maybe not the ideal solution to scaling.
So let's talk about scaling. This is one of my favorite talks. Okay, people say oh, we can't do thousands of transactions per second, but let's talk about why can't we do thousands of transactions per second? If I want to have 1,000 times more transactions per second, all I need to do is have 1,000 times larger blocks, right? Or 100 times larger blocks at 10x interval every minute rather than every 10 minutes. What's the problem with that? What breaks? What's the bottleneck? And it's surprising to find that a lot of researchers, a lot of developers, really good technical people I think very highly of, don't really, or let's say differently, they have a vague notion about it, but they don't see exactly what the problem is. So let's talk about that for a second. What breaks? What is the scalability problem? So surprisingly enough, let's say that we want to have 10x more transaction per second. Then fine, let's take Bitcoin and increase the block size from 1 megabyte to 10 megabytes. And we got 10x more transaction per second. But what happens then is now if you mine a new block and you have to send it to your peers, every time a node sends a block to a peer now takes 10 times longer, right? It needs to send 10 megabytes rather than 1 megabyte. At the best case scenario, even if you ignore congestion and topology and efficiencies and all the nitty-gritty details of real networking in the real world, it's going at best to take it 10 times longer. And why do we care about it deeply? Because the time it takes for a block to reach the entire network, this block propagation time, that's the time in which forks occur, right? Forks only naturally happen if I mine a new block, despite a new one already mined, but I didn't hear about it in time, right? It's still being propagated through the network, and I didn't hear about it, so I mined the block next to it. If I've heard about that other block, I would have mined on top of it. So really, that block propagation time, the time in which the system think about a new block, that's a window of opportunity for forks. Now, if you increase the block size by a factor of 10, it takes 10 times longer for a block to reach the entire system. You increase that window by a factor of 10. So you're going to have 10 times more forks. Now, 10 times more forks is annoying, but you can still work with that. Okay, you'll need 10 confirmations to receive the same level of certainty as you get today with 6 confirmation, but it works. But here's the real kicker. Okay, if you're trying to increase it by another order of magnitude, so 100 megabyte blocks to get 300 transactions per second or so, which is nowhere close to what we need. At that point, for a block to propagate throughout the system, to reach everybody in the system, it takes so long, it takes longer than the 10 minutes interval, okay? So what happens then is that every time somebody mines a new block, pretty much every time you will see a fork happen. And so instead of having a fork every so often, which converge and kind of like is resolved when the next block is mined, you have this weird scenario where you have a fork, and then you have forks of forks, and forks of forks of forks. And the blockchain kind of like unravels like a rope to more and more and more forks instead of converging back to a single consensus. And the blockchain breaks. Nobody knows which fork they should be following. Is it this one or is it that one? And this is the scalability problem. Okay, this is why you can't do arbitrarily large blocks. And at the end of the day, this is a networking problem because in the real world, not the crypto weird world, in the out there, well, YouTube sends terabytes of data to over 1 billion people all over the world, and nobody blinks an eye, right? If you see that like circle thing that it's buffering and you're getting into, you're like, oh my God, where this world is going. I can't believe that this is the 21st century, right? So sending a lot of data to a lot of people is a solved problem. Akamai solved it in like 96, okay? CDNs are being used. We do use internal caching, a bunch of techniques that we know how to use. And what we do at Bloxroute, so this is the scalability problem. And what we do at Bloxroute is bring these networking technologies and bring them to the world of crypto. Okay, Bloxroute is a BDN, a blockchain distribution network. Okay, and what it does, all it does, is to make sure it's a global network of servers which is optimized to serve blockchains and send blocks to everybody super fast in a neutral way. So that's kind of like the high level overview of the problem, okay, and what we're trying to do about it. Does that make sense for you?
Yeah, absolutely. And that part was fascinating to me because when I first got involved in crypto a couple of years ago, I was reading about the Bitcoin Cash debate, which was the better way to go. And I really didn't have any idea which side was right at the time because I didn't know enough. But I looked and I was like, oh, bigger blocks, more transactions. That seems like a good thing, But it's because I only had a surface level understanding of things and I didn't really get how this stuff works. And reading your white paper was one of the first examples I've seen that, proved to me at least that that's not really a solution. It's a solution that might work for a little bit to get slightly better, but to achieve the kind of transactions you actually need, it's going to completely disrupt and, like you said, unravel the chain. I think that was a perfect word, unravel, because you can really picture, all this rope kind of spreading off into different threads and not really being a rope anymore, which is what a blockchain is, a compilation of transactions or threads.
Right. So regarding Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash, so first of all, I think the crypto community as a whole, doesn't matter which crypto you like or don't you like, I think the first thing that we need to do is to understand the problem. You can't solve, very few problems are unsolvable, but you have to talk about what the problem is. So in the debate between Bitcoin and Bitcoin Core and Bitcoin Cash, then Bitcoin Core is kind of like, oh, we're not going to even try. That's impossible. We're all for off-chain transaction. We're not even going to allow the blocks, even 2 megabyte blocks. Now, why wouldn't you? I don't know. I don't have a good answer for that, but that's their belief. On the other hand, you have Bitcoin Cash who say, oh, there's no problem there. And I don't feel that either side is absolutely correct. Okay, so it's not that there is no problem, but it's not that this is like a problem we shouldn't even look at. The idea is, let's look at it and see if we can try to solve it. And it's okay for different people to try different solutions. And whatever works eventually to bring the most value to the most people in the real world. Okay, so this is like getting real world traction is the real game. That's the goal. That's what you need to get. And you maybe the best way to do that is with on-chain transaction. And maybe the best way is with off-chain transaction. And it's okay to experiment with all of that. But how about we have a good discussion on what's the problem instead of jumping on each other, saying like, oh, like you want to do 2 megabyte blocks, you don't understand Bitcoin at all. You're an idiot. It's kind of like, but why? So I think everybody in this space should probably take a deep breath and kind of like, okay, let's look at the problem in a kind of scientific, rational way and see if we can find a way through that. So that's kind of like my take on that. And you can
Absolutely.
find very smart people, very good people on both sides of the debate. In our company, we have big blockers and small blockers. Okay, despite we are trying to get like on-chain transactions, because you can have arguments for both until something was proven.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned on-chain versus off-chain transactions. Compare the technology or the methodology that Bloxroute uses to something that people are super familiar with, like Lightning Network or sharding with Ethereum. Maybe how it might be similar or different than those technology scaling solutions.
Perfect. I will, and I will kind of like talk even how they work nicely together. Okay, I spoke with Raul Jordan here in Chicago, who's kind of like I think the first guy to be funded by the Ethereum Foundation to work on sharding. And we sat together and like I explained Bloxroute to him, and we kind of like were on me like, oh, this would work so nicely with sharding. So let's talk about that for a second. So Lightning is the idea of saying, let's try to do X transactions off-chain for every on-chain transaction that we do. Okay, let's try to do that. That's like a sidechain. That's not Lightning. Okay, a sidechain is something very, very well known, etc. The hard part about Lightning is to say, oh, if I'm connected to you and you're connected to Dale or something, and I want to pay Dale, then how can I find like I'll pay you so you'll pay him and kind of like route these stuff between each other? Now, it's kind of cool. Okay, there are super cool stuff about this technology, but it's also very complicated and sophisticated. The reason it's taking so long is it's because it's not easy at all. Think about it. If you use some route, then by definition, that route is going to be less efficient next time around because you have used like some of your channel that I use between me and you and between you and Dale. And it opens all sorts of vectors for attack. You have to think, what if somebody puts an old state and try to put it on the blockchain? You need a third, like watchtowers, which are third parties who try to prevent you. Like there's a bunch of stuff going on there. That's the idea of sharding. It's a second layer solution, right? Sharding is known as a second layer solution, but if you think, so what is sharding, right? The sharding is saying, oh, one blockchain is insufficient. Let's try to have 100 blockchains, smaller ones, shards, and they kind of like interleave with each other. So each, like there is a capacity for each one of them. So if you have 100 blockchains, then each one of them has the capacity of a blockchain. So you increase your throughput by 100x. And let's have them kind of like interleave with each other so they capture the security properties of them, right? So that's also a second layer solution. But you can think about it, it's several layer one solution, right? So layer two is working on top of the blockchain or using multiple blockchains. Layer one solution is really trying to change how the blockchain behaves, okay? A different consensus mechanism, something like that, which will allow you to do more. Bloxroute is a layer zero solution, okay? It's work underneath the blockchain. Think about it that we're kind of like AT&T and Comcast, okay? You use AT&T to send your blocks to the internet. You use I'm telling you, I deployed a networking infrastructure or a networking technology which allows you to send the data 1,000 times faster and also in a provably neutral way, which the other guys aren't. But the idea is that I removed the bottleneck for you. So if you're a blockchain, okay, or a node on blockchain, your blockchain can now decide what it wants to do with this newfound capacity. If you guys want to do 100 times larger blocks, go for it. If you want to reduce the time between blocks, I don't know, experiment, do whatever you want. I removed the bottleneck preventing you from doing that. And on top of that, you can do whatever you want. So Bloxroute is protocol agnostic. It's for all blockchains, okay? It's really making the networking infrastructure faster. And another cool thing about it is that it's gradually deployable, which is a fancy word of saying, oh, you don't need everybody to start using it all together and to agree about that. So let's say that you're an Ethereum miner, okay? I offer you Bloxroute, and like, oh, if I use Bloxroute, my blocks will go to everyone faster. So the chances of them becoming uncle blocks is reduced. So that's money in the pocket for me as a miner. And I hear about blocks 1,000 times faster because Bloxroute will tell me about blocks even faster. So if I hear about blocks earlier, I can work on them earlier, and that's money in the pocket. So every miner, every node who want to receive blocks faster and to send blocks faster can start using Bloxroute. And the more who use it, the more valuable it becomes. But nobody has to start using it, or you don't need everyone to start using it together. And then it removes the bottleneck. It's the decision of every crypto community, the developers, the miners, the people, the users. They can decide what they want to do with this capacity. It's their choice. We have no say in that. Mm-hmm. But we remove the bottleneck.
That was one of the things that also interested me a lot in the white paper, and something I was going to ask about is there's sort of an incentive where if part of the miners or the transaction processors start using this, the other people are at somewhat of a disadvantage if they don't. Am I correct in that? Or
so there are two parts for that. So there is from the miner's perspective. Okay, so from the single miner perspective, at the beginning, this is a competitive advantage, right? If you use that, you're going to be more profitable than the other miners. Mm-hmm. After a lot of miners start using it, it moves from being a competitive advantage to a competitive necessity, right? If everybody else has it, making them faster, and you don't have it, you're going to be making less money. You're going to be forked or uncle-blocked more often. So that's one aspect of it. So that's from the perspective of the single miner. Now, in terms of the entire crypto, so let's say Ethereum or I don't know, Bitcoin Cash. Okay, let's say Bitcoin Cash start using Bloxroute. Then we give Bloxroute the technology and everything for free. We open source it. We give it to everyone for free. Where the idea for us is for Bloxroute to work, it converges to this win-win-win scenario where everybody should be super happy about Bloxroute existence. Okay, so users, if we increase the volume of transaction per second by a factor of 1,000, then each user should be paying 100 times smaller fee. So users should be super happy about it. It should reduce their fees considerably. Okay, miners should be also very happy about it because each transaction fee is so much smaller, like 100 times smaller, but they get 1,000 times more transaction per second. So in total, they make more fee. Okay, so 10x more fees. So miners are happy too. So the idea is to convert to this win-win-win scenario. And for Bloxroute, we don't enforce, we allow users to pay us a fraction of the mining fee if they want to, right? Now, why would they want to? It's not a donation-based model, okay? Mm-hmm. But we offer this fee reduction service where we say, we added all this capacity to Bitcoin Cash for free, but we add even further capacity beyond that for transactions that pay to Bloxroute. So you never, ever, ever have to pay to Bloxroute. But if we increase the capacity, it reduces the fees even further. So if you make a lot of transactions, if you do micropayments and you're paying for these fees and you want to reduce them, you can pay Bloxroute a tiny percentage of the fee, which will reduce your total fee. So going back to your question, this is like where we're converging to. Everybody should be very, very happy about Bloxroute. That's our business model. We make everybody enough happy so we don't have to advertise ourselves. We don't have to push it. People would like to use it. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And a lot of projects come out and you can tell they're really looking for a reason to even have a token, but that kind of goes against the spirit of a lot of blockchain projects where the aim is to create an incentive system where, like you said, everybody benefits and it benefits everybody to support the network, to have cheap fees, to have fast transactions. And I think this project, Bloxroute, does that really well. So with that in mind, I guess let's talk a little bit about the token that I believe is on the way. BLXR and maybe how that ties in and how that works.
So it's BLXR for Bloxroute. But the first and most important thing to say about it is that it has nothing to do with our services and scalability. Okay, now everything that we discussed up until this point, you don't need to use a token. You never have to use a token. Mm-hmm. Nobody ever has to pay for us. It's not being used. It's not a utility token. Okay, but let's go back for a second. So Bloxroute should converge to this win-win-win scenario where everybody are super happy. But if we create this service of the fee reduction service, and a lot of people are using it, and we're making a lot of money because of that, that's actually a problem. Okay, it's a problem because people would start to resent us. Okay, so we create all this value. We scale blockchains by a factor of 1,000. And we give away 99.9% of that value to users by reducing their fees, and to miners by increasing the amount of fees they're collecting. And we capture 0.1% of that value. But if that 0.1% of the value that we create, that we capture, if that's too big, then we're the leechers, we're the rent seekers, okay? We're the evil people, despite we're not. But this is kind of like how the world works.
It's crypto.
So it's crypto, okay? Now, the sums that we're talking about, we're not here. So we're not aiming at hundreds of transactions per second, not even at thousands of it. Our end game is hundreds of thousands of transactions per second, okay? We want to bring crypto to that level, okay? But even if, like, somewhere along the way, let's say we support one medium-sized crypto, 30,000 transactions per second. If we capture, we should be receiving tiny payments for our service. Let's say 5% of a cent. But if we receive 5% of a cent for 30,000 transactions per second, and there are 31 million seconds in a year, that's something like $460 million per year that we'll be making, which will make people very angry at us. Okay, and if we're talking about our end game, the hundreds of thousands of transactions per second, we're talking about billions of dollars per year in revenues. Now, if we make these monies, people will hate us. It's just the reality. So we figured out that if we want to keep this win-win-win scenario where everyone are very happy with us, we have to make sure that if money is flowing from the crypto ecosystem, it has to pour out back to the crypto ecosystem. So what we're doing is that these tiny payments that go to Bloxroute, well, only 50% of them, half of them go to the company for the development and the operation and everything that the company needs. But half of that, we put in a reserve, okay? So this reserve is just a giant pile of crypto. So if we support Ethereum and Monero and Bitcoin Cash and Zcash and Neo, then tiny payments of Monero and Zcash and Bitcoin Cash and Neo will go into that. So these tiny payments go to the reserve, a giant pile of crypto, and we issue a capped amount of BLXRs, okay? A security token. And this is if you would like to invest in Bloxroute. So we issue a capped amount, let's say 100 BLXRs. If one of those BLXRs is yours, then 1% of that reserve, that giant pile of crypto, which money only pours into, is yours. So if you can kind of like buy 1% of these future revenues, if you would like to. So that allows investors, miners, users, whatnot, whoever in the crypto ecosystem, to be a part of these future revenues. Now, the cool thing about it is that if you have one of these BLXRs and you want to cash out, okay, you can give the BLXR to the reserve and get 1% of the Bitcoin Cash, 1% of the Ethereum, 1% of the Monero, whatever in there. The remaining 99% belong to the other 99 BLXRs. Yours burn and goes outside of circulation. So they're unaffected if you cash out. Okay, so they don't care that you cash out. So this is a way that you can buy. This is a security investment in Bloxroute. If you want to see these future payments, if you want to buy a piece of that. And the idea for us is that we want to sell a considerable amount. We're going to do like a first round, I think, towards the end of the year. And we want to sell enough of it so we bring enough people in. So if you're in the Monero, let's say you're part of the Monero community, and you buy into BLXR, I'm like, oh, you're happy about Monero using BLXR because you're happy about it from the Monero side, and you're happy about it from being an investor in Bloxroute. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's a very good system. It's very interesting to me how by selling your stake, it sort of affects the other coins that are still being held in a positive manner for those holders. So it creates an automatic incentive not to sell. What has it been like building during a bear market? As everybody, as I'm sure, as everybody knows at this point, the market's been really ugly over the past 8 months or so. How has that affected building the project and maybe some challenges that has posed?
So my answer is kind of unfair. So I don't mind the bear market from my perspective. I don't. And from Bloxroute, we are in this very unique position where so I'm a technical guy. Okay, I'm the CEO of the company. I decided I'm going to talk with investors. Okay, I'm going to go out and start to pitching. But I don't know how. I've never done this before. Let's not start with the big players, right? because it's going to be like pancakes. I'm going to be burning. I'm going to burn the first one, right? So let's practice on the smaller ones. So I started talking with the smaller and not so important players at the beginning. And we reached this weird situation. Everybody wanted in. Okay, it makes complete sense. And we realized we have to pump. Like I got my first term sheet like a week and a half after opening my mouth. That does not happen to startups. Okay, so that happened to me. Then like we signed with Flybridge, which we're a technical guy. We have all the knowledge about the technology and what we need to do, but we don't have expertise in building multi-billion-dollar companies. That's where Flybridge, every one of them, as an investor and as a founder, each one of them is kind of like had built multi-billion-dollar companies. So they're behind MongoDB and other really big technologies out there. So we brought them in for their kind of like business expertise. And then I spoke with Nick Tomania from One Confirmation, and he was like, well, I'm all in. And Nick is the guy who did the PR and marketing for Coinbase, right? I think he was their first non-technical employee. So I said, well, if he can do that for Coinbase, he can do that for us. So we brought him in. And then I had the funniest thing where I met with Lucas Ryan from Metastable. And I met him kind of like over coffee. He's a super technical guy. So we had a great conversation. And by the time I land, so I spoke with him, took a flight back from the Bay to Chicago. And by the time I land, I get an email from Naval, who I never spoke before. He's saying like, Lucas loved you. I like Goon, Professor Emin Goon's here, my co-founder. We want everything in your round. Okay, so it was kind of like, I did not meet any, like that was not my problem of finding investors. That our problem was, if we have all these people who want to invest, how do I pick the best partners? Who are those who actually bring the most value to the table? I spoke with I spoke with the general partner of a very, very known, think very big venture fund, whatever. And we sit down, and he used to be a CTO. He's a technical guy. So we sit down for 3 hours and go over the details. Eventually say, okay, I'm in. And I'm like, okay. And then he said, but I need to invest at least $2 million in that. I can't invest anything smaller than that because it won't move my needle. This is the size of the fund the VC that I'm running. I'm not accepting $2 million checks from anybody in the world. That's like, we don't take these kinds of checks. And we ended up not doing that because that check size was just too big for us. We're not accepting that. So honestly, we had this super exciting, fun journey. And I don't know, the bear market hadn't affected us, I think, because our technology is very solid. And everybody who believe in blockchains and crypto know, like, it doesn't matter this bear market or the next bear market. We're here for the long term. So it simply doesn't matter for us, it appears.
Yeah, it's one of those projects where if you read the white paper, there's no doubt that it's very important and probably really promising. And I'm not very technical, so there were some parts of the white paper where I was like, I don't really know, but that wasn't its fault. It was my fault for not really understanding the technology, but it was very evident that it was a good thing that's probably really needed within crypto. So with that in mind, what are some steps that you see for Bloxroute going forward? What are kind of the next steps in the evolution of this project?
So our roadmap is actually quite simple, okay? What we do right now, up until now, if you read the white paper, or I didn't go through the entire argument, how Bloxroute work, I didn't talk about neutrality here, etc. But when I say Bloxroute is going to scale, then this is an argument. And you can come and say, oh, is it true? Is it not true? Okay, until I have shown it to work, this is all hot air, right? It's like you shouldn't be buying in if all you see from me is just like an argument why it should work. Because maybe it should, maybe it shouldn't. Nobody knows. Mm-hmm. So what we're doing right now is we're doing a POC, okay, a proof of concept. We took the Bitcoin code, specifically Bitcoin Unlimited implementation of Bitcoin Cash. And the reason we took them is they have their Gigablock test initiative that they're trying to see how many transactions per second they can actually push. So when they did that, they actually found that the first bottleneck they ran into is not a real bottleneck. It's just that in the implementation of Bitcoin, it takes transaction and put them in the mempool on a single thread. That maxes out at 100 transactions per second. So Andrew Stone from the Bitcoin Unlimited team had implemented a multi-threaded fashion in which transactions are put in the mempool. So they removed that internal bottleneck. So we took their code base. Again, not because we have an integration with them, but because it's slightly better or better than anything else out there. And we're deploying a large crypto network. And I'm going to show you how well does it work without Bloxroute and how well does it work with Bloxroute. Okay, so the idea is to show you how we scale a crypto network. Now, I'm not sure at this point what's going to be the exact number of transactions per second we're going to show you. It's going to be high, but I can't tell you exactly what number because we're running into a bunch of stuff which aren't really bottlenecks. Okay, the code crashes if this happened or that happened. It gets blocks and not in order, like all these stuff. And we're making sure that, okay, we have to solve each thing at once at a time. Mm-hmm. But our roadmap, first thing that we want to do is to show you that it's working. Okay, that's coming in the coming few weeks. After that, once I have this thing at hand, like to show it rather than to argue that it should work, then we're going, so between our investors, okay, so Naval and Metastable and One Confirmation, and between my co-founder, Professor Emily Monsieur, we're connected pretty much to everyone in the different communities out there. Mm-hmm. So once we have that, I'm going to go to, Vitalik and Zuko and Roger Ver and Jihan Wu and Fluffy Pony and pretty much everybody out there. I'm going to say, hey guys, this is what we did. If you're interested in using that, and Charlie from Litecoin, if you're interested, take a look. You don't have to I'm not trying to say, oh, this is the best thing out there. Take a look, see if it's interesting for you. Now, I don't really need these guys because at the same time, I'm actually going to the miners. I'm going to say, hey guys, if you use this, you're going to make more money in your pocket. This is it's open source, it's for free. You never, ever, ever have to pay us. So miners and nodes never pay us. They never, in any scenario. So I'm going to go to the different communities and I'm going to offer that for them. So that's our roadmap. And after we have shown it to work, and after we starting to work with the different cryptocurrencies, and some of the smaller ones are actually already approaching us, okay? So whether it's Ravencoin and whether it's Syscoin and whether it's some of the larger ones. So I spoke recently with Harmony, I spoke with Hashgraph. We're speaking with a bunch of people. So I'm going to go to all of them. So if even stuff like EOS, okay? So I don't know if you're familiar. So EOS, it's a delegated proof of stake, which is much more centralized. Mm-hmm. But the EOS, how are they called? PB, block producers, is, last I heard, they're deploying their own VPN to connect. They still have the same networking problem as everybody else. So I'm going to, even if it's less decentralized, everybody needs a better networking layer. So I'm going to offer it to everyone. As we get more traction and where we're working with them, then we're going to do a token sale in order to allow people to invest in us and make sure that it's in everybody's incentive, whether you are a miner, a node, a user, investor, whatever you are. So you're happy about the Bloxroute existence and getting traction.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this. I've covered most of the things that I had in mind. If there's anything else you want to leave with the audience, maybe where they can find you, on Twitter, your website, obviously, where they can keep tabs on everything going on.
So first of all, I have to say this has been one of the better conversations I had about the topic. Usually we go to also, it's hard. There's a lot to cover. So like this has been great fun. That's the first thing that I want to say. That was fun. I want to do more of these. So that's on that. So we're called Bloxroute, right? Because we're routing blocks. So Bloxroute. And it's super easy to find me or Bloxroute Labs, the company, on Twitter. If you want to hear about updates and what's happening, just follow us on Twitter. If I have to say one more last thing to the people out there who are listening, I would say that, again, the scalability problem is the number one problem, and not enough people understand the problem. Nobody is talking about what's causing the problem. If we're not talking about that, we're not going to solve the problem. So let's look at the problem. Let's really find a good solution for that. And that's it. And that doesn't, it's not me trying to push even Bloxroute, but let's not lose our minds about tribalism and these kind of stuff. And they're okay, let's look on the facts and find a way to solve it for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. I've had a great time talking with you. So thank you for the kind words, Uri. Everybody check them out, bloxroute.com, BLOX route.com. Super interesting project. Check out the white paper. We'll be linking them in the tweet and everything like that too. Uri, thank you again. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. That was fun.